one of the early explosions in healthcare is around medical scribes. You've got in the UK and elsewhere all kinds of players there. You've got in the US a Bridge, in the UK, and they've obviously presence outside of the UK as well. Heidi, Tortoise. These are very pointed solutions to a specific pain point for clinicians. And I think what they've been able to achieve is fantastic. And I think it shows that there are pockets of willingness to adopt, which is exciting because that may not always has been the case in the past. And you might argue, well, AI or voice in particular has sort of enabled some of that transition, which may be true. I think one of the questions is, can you achieve that kind of impact outside of the clinical pathway? Because AI scribing is a clinical solution for clinicians. Time back, great. Less burnout, great. Better service and focus on patient, great. All of those are sort of commercial or patient-facing outcomes. And it's not surprising that one of the places where early adoption has come in is in the clinical segment, because that's often where innovation goes. It's where capital will flow. And it's oftentimes the decision makers who are listening to the voices of their practitioners and of their clinical leaders and saying, okay, how do we make this part of the care provision easier? And it's sort of an unhelpful metaphor, but there's oftentimes in healthcare, you have a bit of a second-class citizen dimension where you have your sort of clinical providers who are seen as the sort of the key doers. And then you have an administrative community or a practice management, operational, financial, commercial community who are as important, like absolutely business critical to the delivery of that high quality care. But where does the innovation happen for them? Where do the solutions happen for them? How can it be that you have a pan-European orthopedic imaging group, market leading, serving tens of thousands of patients on an annual basis, doing hundreds of millions of pounds in revenue, that can serve a patient and clinically diagnose and take them through an incredible journey, but can't match up an invoice? And that's not a reality of bad or ineffective leadership. It's just that people are not thinking about that problem enough. And there's a business in the US, Nitra. They're very much focused, as an example, on the back office and financial tools to run an efficient practice. So again, a different way to take a part of this problem space and start to unpack it in a way that makes sense for not just the clinical service, but also the business service of the clinic.
Yeah, interesting. How do you think AI will transform the healthcare industry, such as, we previously talked about there are two aspects, right? There's drug discovery or like the actual healthcare sort of things, aspect that AI can transform how things are being discovered, etc. But also there's also the admin and process and efficiency, effectiveness side of things. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, definitely opinion. Not claiming to be an expert as such, but I think there are two ways to look at it. The first of which is the extent to which the way AI is being used is contextually bound. So what are the limits around which you're expecting this thing to operate and decisions that you're expecting to make? And then the second one is, what is the clarity of the workflow? So if you're looking at process transformation or business transformation, how well defined is the thing that you're trying to make faster or make better? And I think oftentimes what we find, so drawing on our own experience, is that it's really that latter group, the accuracy of definition, the process definition, that just isn't in place. Because what ends up happening is you open your doors and you have a certain operating procedure, and then you start having the collage of chefs who come in, and this chef wants to do it this way and that chef wants to do it that way, and then a team member leaves and suddenly you have this big gap. So there's a bit of gap plugging and you end up with a sort of Frankenstein operating procedure that becomes very hard to work around. And you start looking into what's the root cause? How did this happen? Where did it come from? And you have to go back and back and back and back. And then some decision that was made 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 5 years ago is the genesis of this complexity. And you have to sort of unpick it that way. So I think for us in the work that we do, where we think it has the most impact is where we can unlock time for an individual rather than replace that individual. And I think oftentimes if we take voice AI agents as an example, you sort of think, oh, well, now all of my patient inquiries are going to be handled. It's not clear, to us at least, it's not clear that that is the right use case. So a very, very simple example. Imagine you have to call 1,000 patients. The highest value activity is the time you spend on the phone with the patient. All the other time is irrelevant. And so there's a question, which is, well, should AI go all the way through to have that conversation? Or should we use technology to get rid of everything that isn't actually having that conversation? Because that is a uniquely patient-centric moment that maybe should be uniquely human, because actually if you can automate and remove the complexity of making 1,000 phone calls, because actually only 5 people will answer the phone, but you can get rid of 995, you can suddenly create capacity for that individual to focus on really, really high value work in a way that they couldn't do beforehand.
Do you think calling patients is still going to be a critical aspect in terms of, from the business of clinics perspective? Is it going to be critical, considering most clinics would do marketing, email marketing, would do SMS, would do WhatsApp messages to engage with patients without actually picking up the phone and call them? What's your opinion on that?
So I think patient engagement has been a remarkably disappointing part of the patient experience. And I think the easiest way to think about it, to look at it, is like rewind the clock to a point in time where somebody was responsible for hand-holding someone through the care journey, answering questions, ensuring follow-up, supporting them. If you imagine that it's doctor to patient one-to-one, or a patient coordinator to patient one-to-one, that person is being taken all the way through a journey in a very high contact manner. And somewhere along the way, practice management software, email congestion, omni-channel communication, whatever the source may be, we got to a place where sending an email to remind someone about an appointment was good enough. Email intake to ensure that someone has it in their calendar was good enough. And we communicate with patients all the time. We send a note to a patient saying, "Hey, how are you? We haven't seen you in a while. How are you feeling?" And the responses you get back are, you'd think you just, handed this person 1,000 pounds. It's so nice to hear from you. Thank you so much. Things are great. Okay. Why was that hard? What's fallen down over the last 10, 15 years that we're going to say, okay, the solution here is we just need to be able to make 5,000 automated phone calls at once. The problem here is that the way we're thinking about engagement along that patient journey is marketing. It's reminders. It's promotions. It's not care. It's not care-based. And so I think the engagement layer really needs to come back to something that feels conversational. And conversational in a way that if your uncle were your pediatrician or your aunt was your dentist, you would message them and say, "Hey, this is going on," or "Hey, I'm feeling this way about something." And how do we restore that quality of connection between practitioner and patient? And it's not obvious, to us at least, it's not obvious that voice AI agents are going to do that. Whereas finding a way to amplify and augment the clinician or augment the clinical provider to have those intimate one-to-one conversations, then suddenly you find your way through some of the administrative chaos into a place that actually delivers value and relationship-led care for the patient.
And clearly that you have seen there is a strong correlation between qualitative, high quality, high interpersonal sort of connection through calls, personal calls, with ROI, revenue uplift, etc.
So we were working with a practice where we were supporting them to re-engage some of their patients, particularly those who had disengaged from their clinical journey. So there was still some clinical work to do, and started calling those patients. And we had several patients upon being contacted that said, "Is this a person?" And the answer was, of course, yes. And they couldn't believe it. It was as if someone suddenly won the lottery. This is a real human. What? Like, how is that the case? So I think especially now when everything, your customer support service for your online shoes and your restaurant reservation is give it to AI. Suddenly when you do have a human show up on your phone, there's something special about that. And that's interesting as well. So I think what we see is that there are points of the patient journey and points at which re-engagement does not need to be human first or can be human enabled. And that's good enough to contribute to and compound revenue and growth and patient experience and patient retention. But these moments of surprise and delight that you can stitch into the patient journey, that's hugely powerful. That's what generates that long-term commitment to the practice. That's what turns a single patient into a patient who invites their friends. That's what turns a single patient into a patient who talks about how amazing their experience was online and advocates and champions the brand and the clinical service. And how often do you see a patient go home from a dentist and write proactively about their experience online? Oh my goodness, I can't imagine a better dental experience. And you saw a lot of this around Neko Health, which is a huge innovator in healthcare and medtech. And people they won't shut up about how amazing their experience was in clinic. When is the last time that someone did something similar for their pediatric visit or their routine GP appointment or any other form of clinical service that they're more accustomed to consuming? So I think, yes, if you can provide that engagement layer so that this becomes service and hospitality plus healthcare, you might see that same sort of proactive organic championing by the patient body, which is where growth will come from much more than any other place.
Interesting. Okay. What is your number one hot takes about the clinics in the UK or the business of a clinic in the UK? Number one hot take that for sure other people will disagree or have strong reaction to it.
It seems to be that there is a public stigma, cultural stigma, resistance to things having to do with sales, with profitability, with being commercial. So much so that if people hear those words, everyone's uncomfortable. And I appreciate being American originally and being here. I appreciate why there's some dissonance there. It's like something that I personally have had to learn in my time here. But I also think that resistance is one of the things that's holding back innovation, because everyone is so bound to the idea that business is bad, healthcare is good, but actually those two things working well together, it's all good. It's all great. And so I think the stigma to overcome, the challenge that almost at a market level we try to overcome is this is a business that serves people to a high standard and fulfills their needs. It happens to be that those needs are healthcare related and care related, but it is ultimately a service that people are in many cases paying for, whether they're paying for that privately or they're paying that through their taxes. Someone's paying for it. And I often joke about, an airline experience. It's one of the only experiences in the world where you can pay a lot to travel somewhere, to fly somewhere, and it is still acceptable that you will wait for 3 hours in the airport. You take a flight at 12 in the afternoon, midday, you need to wake up at 7 a.m. to get to the airport, check in, make sure you're at the gate, etc. There are very few services, especially premium services, where it's acceptable to wait 3 hours for something. Airlines is like it's an exceptional case. And hey, by the way, oftentimes it's healthcare. So that's not great, right? I mean, airlines, it's great we can fly around, but whenever you're being benchmarked to air travel or airport experience, you're sort of, there's a lot of growing to do. There's a lot of improvement to do. You can move up the ladder quite a lot by doing a very little amount. And I think that's the challenge at a sector level is to prioritize the customer as the user of this thing and making their life easier more than we focus on making anyone else's life easier.
Yeah. I mean, something you talked about previously, about setting high standard, right? You mentioned about Apple, obviously very different industry. What other industries do you think set a really high bar for patient experience or customer experience? And why aren't clinics keeping up?
So hospitality is an interesting one. And you put in that like food and beverage, hospitality, travel, whatever it is. And I think hospitality is especially interesting because the whole purpose of hospitality is to deliver an experience. Same with F&B. You really want people to come away in love with what they just did because that's how they come back. That's the thing that brings them back. And if you take food and beverage as an example, You have it on both ends of the spectrum. Super premium, very expensive dinner, all of the bells and whistles that come with it. There's a restaurant in London, Dishoom, Indian food, and you can show up and wait online for an hour and they will bring you 14 different versions of an appetizer while you're waiting online. Because they don't want you to be unhappy when you're waiting online. You almost have a meal before you sit down. And hey, by the way, the falafel shop down the street, they also hand out falafel bowls while you're waiting online at lunch. So price point doesn't change. Premium, local, whatever it might be, price point doesn't change the fact that you can provide a high quality customer experience. Maybe it makes it easier if you're upmarket. Maybe it makes it easier if you're charging premium to have a premium quality experience, but you can still deliver high customer value in service. It's not clear how that translates to healthcare. I mean, you can imagine being online at a restaurant, being given a collection of delicious things to eat so that you're not left waiting, and then put that, in comparison to a magazine. Here's a magazine you're going to get. By the way, I haven't updated those magazines in 5 years, and they might have ripped pages in them. But you sit here, read this magazine, and on the other side of the street, we'll be handing out free food to make sure you don't have to wait impatiently for the 3 minutes that it'll take for you to get to the front of the line. So I think there's a lot that you can look to in other sectors to improve, to lift that patient experience. There are a lot of clinics now, and going back to the US, UK, a lot of clinics in the US are now serving juices, coffees, drinks, beverage inside of that waiting experience. Now, do you need to become a sort of coffee shop alongside running a clinic? No, probably not. It's not right for every brand. But there is something inside of the fact that while someone is going through this journey with me as a provider or with us as a provider, we're going to look after them as if they were the only patient. And I think that's something that we should be thinking very seriously about.
Setting the standard higher. You asked that question to other people last week. I'm going to throw it back to you. 100K budget question. So if you are a clinic owner doing 1 million turnover and over, 1 million plus turnover, annual turnover. And if someone investor or whoever, a friend or whatever, handing you over a 100K check, where would you spend that money as a clinic owner, and how and why?
Controversially, I'd remove the entire reception. That's not to say that reception desks functions aren't important. That's not to say that we should, lose that part of the healthcare experience. There is certainly a front door need in a healthcare setting. So
almost like a rebrand or repackage.
I would repackage the function. And if I had a 100K check, that would include physical changes to the space, but it would also include a complete rethinking around the kinds of people that we're hiring into that function. It would include a rethinking on the kind of tools that we use, the expectations that we set. I would dedicate the majority of that resource to thinking very differently about what my front door is meant to do for my patients. Because somewhere along the journey, the front door became administrative, paperwork, responsive, service-driven, wonderful, delightful, easy to engage with, but not a point of leverage for the practice. And that is a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity for the patient, and it's absolutely a missed opportunity for the practice. And I think you're starting to see people want to invest more in that now. They're looking into other sectors. They're advertising for new roles. They're trying to bring people into the space who might be able to do things a little bit differently. But if I'm doing 1 million in turnover, 2 million in turnover as a clinic, the way I'm going to inflect, drive utilization, drive throughput in the clinic, reduce open seats, is not by, as an example, going out and recruiting someone who has 2 years of customer service experience and saying, I'm going to train them on everything else. You go out and you hire a salesperson as an example. You ask them about quotas. How did you perform last year against your quotas? What was your pipeline like? talking about your movement from new meetings to revenue closed. Why aren't we having that conversation with new front office employees? Why aren't we having that conversation with people that we're entrusting to be the protectors of that patient experience? Instead, we're saying, let's take someone who has 2 years of customer service experience, don't really care where that customer service experience comes from, might be high street retail, and we're going to put them through 3 months of training. We're good to go. And you know what? 4 out of 10 times, maybe that's true. But there are still these huge gaps in the front office that really need to be closed. So if I had a 100K check, blank check, that's where it goes. I think if I had 200K blank check, I'd take the other 100K and do it in the back office, because we work with practices who are literally paying bills on bank transfer one by one on the 16th of every month. We've got another practice who's reconciling payments across 4 different Excel files, and sometimes expecting people to do that while they're also doing 6 other jobs and going line by line across transactions to try and make sense of what's happening. There could not be a worse use of someone's time when you're trying to deliver high value service to a patient to be mired and drowning inside of these very administrative, very outdated processes. And there was this great thing I read from one of the employees at, I think it's a company called Nori. They do restaurant booking management software or restaurant software. And he said, when you live in a tech bubble, you think it's impossible for anyone not to be using the latest tools. And then you go into a different industry where it's not necessarily tech native, and you're not stepping back 5 years to a slightly older version of software. You're stepping back 15 years. I spoke to a practice this morning, wonderful practice, very successful, paper-based, all the way through, paper-based appointments, paper-based everything. That's the reality right now. So we can live in the world of everything's automated. That's just not the case. So I think this is a question of changing not only where we're putting money, but also who is there responsible for implementing and taking action around those changes.
Yeah, because when we spoke with, I believe it was a practice owner last week or not, when you throw that question at them, they were saying, oh yeah, equipment, because they can provide more offering, like they can sell different upsell, cross-sell, etc. But it sounds to me that you were suggesting a different approach, which is looking at your existing offering first. Don't bother spending extra budget on marketing, on expensive equipment. Looking inwards, looking at the current process, the current offering. Are we doing it on an optimal capacity or level? Optimize that first. Maximize the revenue potential, commercial potential first before going into expanding, right? Is that the right way to look at it?
Yeah. So one way to think about it is what part of my practice is leaking revenue the most? Where am I shortchanging? So a lot of people will think, as an example, they'll say, well, I want to fill seats on a last minute basis. So if I have a cancellation in my schedule, I want to put someone in that appointment as soon as I can. Otherwise, I've got an empty chair. I've got a practitioner who's not being utilized. And so there's this huge amount of focus on something like chair utilization or last minute appointment filling, so that you don't have these blocks where there are people who probably want that care who aren't coming into the practice, even though there is availability. And you see this in private practice. You see this in a GP. Right? I used to go to a GP where they had a big sign in the front that says, this is the number of appointments that didn't attend last month. So this is a problem in all forms of healthcare provision. So I think one way to look at the areas for investment are where am I not optimized? I'll give you another example. Speaking to a clinic that spends a couple £100 a month on marketing. It's a really high-performing clinic, chiropractic, MSK, allied health, phenomenal practice. And they get a lot of their appointments through online booking. Fantastic. What about all of the people who are engaging with the practice who don't actually go through the online booking form and complete? Who are they? Where do they go? So there's all of this optimization opportunity around stuff you're already doing. And I think the temptation is to do more stuff. I'm going to do more of this. I'm going to add new treatments. I'm going to do new marketing, new campaigns. There was this huge campaign by one of the large private hospital groups in the UK, campaign advertising plays on the tube, stuff all over the city. And yet they have empty chairs, and yet they have empty rooms, and they have massive gaps in practitioner schedule. So what are we doing to create value from inside of the existing practice? That is where I think attention needs to go first. And oftentimes it's just very easy to say, more new patients. I need to get more new patients. Cool. What's your recall process right now? I send an email out once every 3 months. Okay. That's it? You don't have to do much more. You just need to have people pick up the phone. Why aren't we doing that? Why are we spending more money on marketing, getting potentially low quality new patients who aren't properly qualified instead of just focusing on recall? And so I think there's this desire to do new. And actually, a lot of this is about squeezing the orange. Just squeeze a bit harder, squeeze a bit differently, twist a bit differently, and suddenly we extract this value. And I think that mindset applies in small practice, it applies in mid-sized practices, it applies in large practices as well.
That's essentially kind of the reason why ROI in this space, in this particular function, could be so much higher than acquiring new customers, right? We all know that acquiring new customers are much more costly than reconverting existing customers.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so since you said all that, if you had to design a clinic entirely around patient delight rather than clinic care, what would it look like? Of course, we're not saying drop clinic care completely, but what would be your ideal sort of dynamic of?
Yeah. So I think, so I'll sort of detour for a second on that. So if you look at practice management software, and it's in the name, right? Practice management software, not patient magical system, right? It's practice management software. Critical, key part of your stack, must have. The entirety of the software is built around a process. When you log in, the first thing that you see is a calendar, not a collection of frowning faces or a collection of smiley faces. You see a calendar. This is what my day looks like. So it's not patient-centric. So I think if you imagine a ground-up build, the thing that should be in the middle is patient. And right now, the thing that's in the middle is practice. Now, those are two different views of the world. So it's not that you can suddenly sacrifice your view of the practice, but you also need to have a view of the patient. And that is missing. And as a consequence, you end up sort of bending the patient into your process, right? So that doesn't really make sense together. So if you think about rebuilding that experience from the ground up, I think that you need to say, okay, what is the happy flow for my patient? And this doesn't often require huge transformation. It just means that you're going from zero to completion with a patient or a collection of patients. What does that journey look like? A lot of practices will think about, what is my patient journey? And they'll go step by step by step by step by step, which is exactly what the practice management software is doing. It's very linear. It's very much a process flow. That's not the reality of serving patients. We know that from the work that we do, that patients' journeys look like this. And so you can't have that inside of a neat flow diagram. It just doesn't fit. So I think that the really helpful approach, and actually Matt Lerner, who's a sort of growth thinker, does a really good job of this. He says, what are the jobs to be done? So what is the patient hiring you as the healthcare practice to do? What problem is the patient trying to solve? And how do you help them solve this? And I think if you ask the question that way, you get away from, first I need my intake form, then they're going to move into booking, then they're going to move into this, then they're going to move into that. And instead, we're going to say, what is my patient hiring me to do? If I'm a dental practice, if I'm a chiropractic clinic, what is my patient, why are they paying me? Now you could say, oh, it's because I have a back problem or because I have a tooth problem. It's not always the case. So it could be, yes, that you have a tooth problem, but it might also be that you suddenly want to take more proactive dental hygiene, care of your teeth. Maybe you're thinking about prehab, not just rehab, if you have a knee injury or hip injury. So oftentimes the patient is hiring you not for the clinical service. The clinical service is part of how you deliver that value. If you think about hip replacement, the patient is not hiring you to replace their hip. The patient is hiring you to improve their quality of life. And so if suddenly your provision is, I'm going to focus on improving your quality of life and not, I'm going to replace your hip, everything you do along that journey is different. It's no longer about an intake form that you fill out on an iPad or on a pen and paper when you get to the practice, it's suddenly you find yourself asking, what am I going to do to enhance this person's quality of life? You ask all different kinds of questions. So I think the missing conversation is, what is the patient hiring me to do? It's not that they're hiring me to do a thing, to have a point fix. On occasion, you have a tooth you need to remove, it's whatever, sure. But oftentimes, the reason the patient is hiring you is much broader, much more comprehensive. And we need to discover what that is in order to best serve them.
And that kind of put the whole patient-centric concept into the aperture, right? So that it's instead of thinking from practice perspective, you need to think from fundamentally. But how do you solve that problem of, there's so many patients, they all have very different needs and demands and expectations. How do you put that into the commercial lens or commercial constraint of this is still going to be a business, or I have to manage both sides of individual needs and demands, as well as operating at scale in order to get to whatever revenue target that we want to get to as a ambitious clinic owner? How do you manage that balance?
So if you're, so let's say you're a small practice, small or mid-sized practice, you're doing 1.5 million a year in turnover. You're saying, okay, I want to grow. I'm not at capacity. My chair utilization is 55%. I'm spending a lot on marketing. The growth moment is not, let's say it's never. It's very unlikely to be a magical silver bullet. It's not suddenly you're going to look at your practice and say, if only my chairs faced left instead of right, everybody would love it here. They'd tell their friends about it. It is more often than not a collage, right? You have a collage of solutions. You have some changes that need to happen here, some changes that need to happen here, some changes that have to happen there. And I think within those changes, in order to hit that point of inflection, there are usually themes. And the question is, which theme are you going to focus on first? So, as an example, is the thing that is preventing me from growing as a practice, is the root cause of that thing a customer or patient discovery problem? Am I really understanding why patients are coming to me in the first instance, to be able to serve them and to increase lifetime value, to extend the quality of care? Do I really understand that? Or am I just trying to sell them the same thing that I've sold everyone else? Am I just trying to push them the same program I've pushed everyone else? So we talk about things like memberships and loyalty programs, but there's no patient context in that, right? So it's great that you have an app that can sell memberships. Great that you have an app that can sell loyalty. That's important. That's a huge step in the right direction. That's practice management software thinking. It's, I have a thing. Now I'm going to give that thing to you. So if my problem is customer discovery, then that's a front office problem. I need to change the way that that's behaving. I need to think differently. I need to take a step back saying, what is the customer? What is the patient hiring me to do? And that probably leads you to a very different place and leads you to solve those problems differently. So I think it's trying to identify those themes, and it's very different by practice. I think one of the things that a lot of clinic owners don't have, and certainly I didn't have when opening the doors for the first time, is how do I even look for those themes? What do I even think about in terms of identifying those pressure points? And a lot of people will come in and say, your front office isn't selling. Let's give them sales training. Maybe that's not the problem. Just because that's the thing you do, just because the thing that you do is sales training, doesn't necessarily mean that that's the problem in the practice. Maybe the problem in the practice is that the way that you intake and receive new patients forces you to have sales-based conversations. Maybe the root cause is that you're not setting that patient up to have a discovery-based conversation. You're setting them up to be sold to. So actually, the problem is well before that first conversation. So I think that process of trying to understand the root cause of those issues, that will unlock some of that growth, some of that change for the practice.